This is Ryan.
And I'm John.
Welcome to preview season.
Oath of the Gatewatch.
All right, we're back again with another awesome set of preview cards. I'm just on fire for
this. This is a huge episode.
Yep.
This episode is massive.
Buckle up, get some popcorn, get ready.
Let's dive in.
Number one,
Bonesaw.
Bonesaw. In addition to being able to quote Spider-Man, all right, he's the bad guy in like the first Spider-Man movie. He's like the wrestler guy. Bonesaw. Oh, all right. That did not go over as well as I had thought. All right.
Classic Bonesaw.
Classic Bonesaw. Before your time.
Yeah.
So the neat thing about this one, it costs 0 mana, which makes it very easy to cast a second spell in the same turn.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, hello. A Surge deck might even want multiple copies just to get a discount on everything else. And it flat out doubles the power of any Scion token you happen to have. So I wouldn't feel bad about putting this in a limited deck if it needs a little bump in power.
I didn't even think about Surge with this card. That's actually excellent. So if you're like
myself for the Bonesaw.
So yeah, I mean, if you have this in a deck with a lot of Surge cards, you don't like just play it because the value in it is not the fact that it's an equipment. It's that it's a free spell to trigger all your Surge stuff. It's awesome.
That's it.
It's so it's like Weapons Trainer but an equipment. You know what? I think I'm going to call it Weapons Strainer and see if anyone notices. You ever play that game with anyone? Like, you call your sideboard your cyborg?
Yeah.
And you see if people notice, and then you just call it that?
I have, Ron. I've done that a lot, actually.
It's the best game. So, aside from the synergy with the aforementioned Weapon Strainer, you can play this in a draft deck in a pinch. So, a Weapon Strainer, does it use a strainer as a weapon? Does it strain its own weapons? What do you do with that?
There's so much Vorthos there to be uncovered.
Oh, yeah, totally. I'm asking you.
I could see him
putting you on the spot.
Do they have like pasta on Zendikar? Would they have strainers around?
I don't see why they wouldn't have pasta.
Well, it's kind of like an Italian thing, and is Balaged like the Italy of Zendikar?
Could be.
Man, deep question. Like we said, this is going to be a huge episode with these questions.
Yeah, I'm glad we put that question in this episode.
Well, if you happen to know the answer, leave it in the comments. We would love to hear, where does pasta come from on Zendikar? Yeah. Who makes the best noodles?
So yeah, in Bonesaw you can play this in a draft deck in a pinch. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're going to want to mostly hold it for Surge. I can tell you that in in Shards of Alara draft, it shone brightest in the decks that really cared about lots of Exalted triggers, those old Bant decks.
Yep.
But I see this being fine in conjunction with lots of Eldrazi Scions because in Magic, 2 is it's just a way bigger number than 1.
Agreed. All right, how about Boulder Salvo? In every set, it seems that red is now getting a high-cost, high-damage spell that can burn down larger threats. Now, since red's removal has to scale at kind of a linear rate, they're often at a disadvantage, but the surge cost here can help offset that somewhat. Now, by linear rate, I mean like compared to white, where Stasis Snare will nab any creature flat out regardless, Boulder Salvo has a finite range of things that can actually kill. So this is probably best to use in a two-headed giant game where your teammate can play, small or medium creature, whatever, trigger that surge, and then you can kill their best blocker before heading into combat.
Yeah, it's a good, solid removal spell. It's fine at both rates. This isn't the type of card where you just should never play it for its non-surge cost. You can play it at both and be perfectly happy with both. I mean, there's just not much else to say about it than that. Sure. It's solid.
All right, maybe we can say some more about this next one. Shandra Flamecollar.
Whoosh.
Man, if her tokens had trample as well as haste, I could see it being a bit better. But right now, the way it stands, I think they're just pushing a little too hard for such a radical departure from red's usual hyper-aggressive nature.
Yeah.
I think the idea here is more of a slow, controlling kind of card that still deals a ton of damage and ends games. But since red has almost no other cards to support this new style of play, I think Chandra's going to be stuck in your hand, and you're going to be like cursing under your breath that it's not a lightning strike or something that will actually do real damage and is less than 6 mana.
I can't imagine a constructed deck from any era in Magic that would want this card.
I mean, even reaching, I'd be like a Grixis kind of control thing, put her down, use her kind of -X sweeper to wipe out the board, and then...
That sweeper's that's Wildfire, but worse.
Yeah.
Because you don't even get to kill lands. You just...
Yeah. All right, well...
it's bad. This is not a good card.
All right, moving on.
Sorry.
No, I'm not. I don't need... All right. I don't take it personally, all right? It's not like Chandra and I are a couple or anything.
It's not like you went to prom and there was a whole blow up and she went home with Troy and you kind of...
Troy, where's that lightning strike when I need it? All right. Corrupted Crossroads. We can add this.
We're moving on. No more Troy.
No more Troy. He's the worst. Oh, Corrupted Crossroads. We can add this to an increasingly long list of rares that I simply do not want to open at the pre-release.
There are an immoderate amount of them.
I think I'm just not going to be happy with anything. Seems to be extremely narrow in focus, though. I admit we don't yet know enough about how to value colorless mana.
That's true.
Could be the key that unlocks some very cool doors in this format, but there's also a lot of other ways to generate it, so I don't feel the need to stick this card in my deck in particular. Compared to like Ally Encampment, which effectively does all the same stuff without costing you life, and it can even go one step further and provide another useful ability, this card, Corrupted Crossroads, feels way outclassed.
Yeah, it seems very, very bad. Yeah. It could be borderline playable if there ends up being a standard Devoid deck, but... I mean, first of all, I doubt there's going to be a standard Devoid deck, and even if there was one, I don't think it's going to want this card. Yeah. Like, it just doesn't.
Right.
It's terrible.
Terrible. It's the Troy of lands. Oh, boy. Embodiment of Insight. Here we go. Ignoring everything else, you get a 4/4 with Vigilance for 5 mana. Well, that's big enough to crush the small and medium allies, but not quite big enough to tangle with a full-scale Eldrazi. Drop a land, though, and you can immediately give it haste and attack with it, and then still use it for mana later that turn, because it's got Vigilance. Or you can even use it during combat, right? You declare it as an attacker, and then it can still tap itself to pay for its own combat trick. I think giving creature lands Vigilance does help offset their biggest drawback, right? You can't use them for combat and paying for your spells.
Yeah, Vigilance on lands is huge.
Right. So Embodiment of Insight overall feels more useful to me than his brother in red, but I'm still not sold on making green part of my game plan.
So the embodiments are a cycle. We can operate under the assumption that this is going to be a complete cycle, right? What do you think?
As complete as the oaths ended up being,
sure.
At least, I guess. I don't know.
So a 4/4 for 5 is not the best rate in the world, but like Ryan said, Vigilance is huge on lands, and the landfall trigger is still good.
Yeah.
Like landfall getting a 3/3 every time is really great. I mean. So, on the upside, this guy is going to be a fairly late pick in draft, but on the downside, it's going to be a late pick because it's green. So, you're going to have to fill your deck out with other green cards in order to play this guy. Hopefully you get that blue-green flash creature we spoiled, but yeah, I mean, Embodiment of Insight is it's a tricky card to evaluate right now.
Agreed. All right, let's take a look at this next one. Fall of the Titans.
Yeah.
All right, so this card seems designed almost exclusively for two-headed giants. So let me just spell out how this is going to work, okay? Your teammate plays a spell. Anything. I don't care. Whatever. Bonesaw for all I care.
Sure.
Now, you get to cast this for the surge cost.
Yep.
So say you pay 5 for X along with the 1 red. You now get to do 5 damage to 2 targets, and each of your opponents can be a different target, even though they share a life total. So your 5 damage now actually bleeds them of 10 life. So if the enemy team is tapped out, I would throw every Scion token I have into making this thing huge and just stealing the game in one shot. Now, in a regular draft or in Constructed, this becomes a completely different beast. You don't get to cheat and double the damage the way you do in Two-Headed Giant. And in fact, it becomes even harder to cast it for the surge cost, because now it's all on you to pay for that first spell yourself. That's going to reduce the mana that you have available to funnel into the X.
So this is a surge fireball-ish.
Yeah.
I gotta admit, I wasn't really thinking about it in Two-Headed Giant,
right,
or any sort of team magic. I was just thinking about its kind of applications in Limited and Constructed,
which is where it'll be used most of the time. But because they're putting a special emphasis on Two-Headed Giant for this pre-release in particular, I wanted to mention it.
Yeah, you definitely want to crack this card in your Two-Headed Giant flights. I think it's still really good in one-on-one Limited, but I mean it's worse than Rolling Thunder, but it's still good. Many, many, many cards are worse than Rolling Thunder, so that's a really high bar.
Yeah.
And this card falls short, but that doesn't mean it's bad. It's still very good. Yeah. That said, I don't see it making a huge splash in the one-on-one world of Constructed.
Yeah.
Surge is just a huge drawback to mana sinks, and this is a mana sink, so it's kind of too big a drawback to bear.
Agreed. All right, so that leaves us with...
Oh, and I will say that I didn't realize it dealt X to the creatures and the players. I assume it divided up like Fireball. I didn't realize it just like they take 5, they take 5, and then their opponent takes 5.
Pick up to 2 targets and wallop them both. Yeah.
That is awesome.
Yeah. All right. Overwhelming Denial.
Woo.
Yeah. So between this card and Sphinx of the Last Word, somebody at Wizards R&D must really hate having their spells countered. If your opponent has a card that you absolutely cannot deal with any other way, then this is your silver bullet. Just don't miss your shot.
So the last time we saw a card like this, it was on Last Word, which was in Darksteel, and it said 2 blue, so converted mana cost 4, just like Overwhelming Denial. This spell can't be countered, counter target spell. It saw 0 play because at the time there was an affinity deck which was breakneck fast and super duper good, and there was no reason to play anything else. So it's tough to evaluate this card based on the past because it had no role in the past. The important thing to remember with Overwhelming Denial is that it's better at countering a threat than defending it, because what's going to happen is, let's say you play a threat, your opponent counters it, you're going to counter their counter with Overwhelming Denial. The Overwhelming Denial is going to resolve. Your creature's still going to be on the stack. They can still counter it again. So it's kind of ironic that this has such an aggressive surge cost, because it doesn't really help you protect your own spells. It just is kind of bad in that way. So watch out for that, because that might be a little bit of a design trap that lots of players can fall in, and we don't want you to fall in that trap.
Yeah, even in a 2-headed giant, if you're trying to defend your teammate's spell, same kind of problem happens there. You would get the surge price, but you're still, they can just wait for the stack to kind of clean up a bit, and then they just go after it again. So.
Definitely.
Wow. All right. Well, you kind of just smashed my reality on that card, John. So now we have to look at Reality Smasher.
Oh, boy, that is an excellent segue.
It's so easy.
Well done.
So I dig how Wizards has found all these weird little abilities to give the colorless an identity of its own, right? So this is kind of almost sort of hexproof, but not really. Yeah. Whatever you call it, they effectively have to spend 2 cards to kill this, and they better come up with them real quick, because you're attacking right away and running over anything they put in front of you. 5/5 trample, haste.
So in Return to Ravnica Limited, there was a deck. It was red-black, and you played all the black removal, and then at the top of the curve was all the Tenement Crashers you could handle, and they all were just like big fat creatures with haste that just bash, and they were so tough to deal with. And I really like that deck, and I like this card. It's a 5/5 hasty trampler with upside. I can definitely get behind this. Its ability kind of becomes more and more irrelevant as the game goes on, and even at the time you're casting it, your opponent is probably going to have a land to pitch to it to kind of remove it, but by then you've already dealt your damage, because you're probably hitting them when they're tapped out.
Yep.
Which, it's a good card. I really like it.
All right. Well, if you like it enough to pre-order it, now's the best time. TCGplayer.com has all the cards from Oath of the Gatewatch available for all the previewed ones so far, I should say. Not the full set. Not quite yet.
Almost.
We're getting there. We're getting close. We've seen a lot, and there are some really good ones. So get in there and pre-order on TCG Player right now. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.
Goodbye.